I think we will continue with a panel discussion. I would like to have Michael from Bird. He's maybe he's mining on his smartphone. I don't know. Eddie, if you could join us, and Enrique, maybe you could join us as well. Dank, if you like, please come to us as well. Do you want? So. I think that with Michael, it's kind of crash of culture here. So he's actually a lawyer from Bird, and I was with him on some panels, and he's kind of, I think, has a different view of the way how things are regulated and how things are, let's say, should act legally correct. I think maybe Michael, maybe you should just explain how you see this thing in a more national and more global way.
Nice to meet you too. I'm not even sure if I have a different view from what I heard today. The first thought I had was, from a legal perspective, actually, how are we going to master the transition? I mean, that would be my question, having heard all of what you said, because I think obviously it's a feasible system. One can kind of build a society on those principles, because they are game theory principles, and that's something that is not unfamiliar to us as a society as a whole. There are a lot of other things that are realized and construed and actually lived on the same principles. The question is, how do we actually master the transition from the existing system as it is, and it's primarily also a legal system, because we all live on conventions, we all, or maybe most of us, comply with laws. It's a game changer. The question is, what needs to be done? The kind of alternative system is there. It's up and running, as you mentioned, for years. So the question is, obviously there are some people buying into it heavily now. Some people are looking at it. Others are very skeptical. So what's next in terms of making it a mass product? Maybe it's already, but bringing it into the society in a way that actually has the ability to change our legal system and the way we're living.
Well, I would say the first rule, in terms of my principles, right, is voluntarism, right? The idea that this should be a choice, this should be a voluntary thing. So unlike the currencies that you operate with in a national setting, or the regulations you operate in a national setting, no one is forced to use Bitcoin. No one is in any way compelled. And in fact, I discourage people from investing in it because of volatility. It's primarily, first and foremost, a voluntary system. So you have to choose to participate. You have to choose to put yourself into the jurisdiction of Bitcoin, which is not the case with other jurisdictions. I have very limited choices in some of my jurisdictional actions, right? I'm a US citizen, right? So no matter where I work or live or move in the world, I pay taxes in the US and Germany if I live here. That is not necessarily voluntary. To me, the other really important principle is non-aggression, right? That choices by human individuals should not be driven by coercion, violence, or the threat of violence. And I think there, the question of how the transition happens depends far more on the traditional financial system than it does on Bitcoin. Because right now, we're seeing a world in currency crisis. We're seeing central banks setting fire to national currencies all around the world. And there are ways to do it which are positive. Maybe Switzerland is doing it one way, and then Venezuela is doing it another way. And I certainly don't want to see it done the Venezuela way, because no matter what Bitcoin does, if the fiat system collapses, if the national currencies go into hyperinflationary spirals, and then through the threat of force, try to take hostage the entire population of a country, or a continent, as in the case of Europe, then our voluntary exit becomes seen as an aggression almost, and that's dangerous. So I'm hoping for a peaceful transition.
maybe a question to Dan, because he mentioned it's a voluntary system. So is this something that is concerning to German law, something that you could say like, yeah, you can use it or you can leave it? So is this something that would fit to a German law system then?
I think you have to distinguish the Bitcoin stratosphere, the area of Bitcoin. And when you enter into financial markets, then this is a centralized financial market. The reason why this is centralized is that over time, we as a society just put a certain importance to financial markets. Financial markets or finance in general is the backbone of the economy. So this is the reason why you have to be very tight in terms of regulation. And when we look into Bitcoin, and this is one that I found very amazing in your presentation, Andreas, is that the sense of decentralization and the concept of decentralization and the concept of voluntarism is something that is remarkably ideal. I think this is the end, the utopian way of financial markets, how it should be. The question that I have is only that when we determine financial markets to be as important, and I would include financial markets also with the payment system per se. So when we have a payment system that is very important, and we have an introduction of a very democratized system like Bitcoin, how does it work? Because again, I cannot wait to read your new book, Internet of Money, because from a monetary policy perspective, you have to distinguish basically two principles. One would be the discipline, the principle of discipline, the scarcity of money and of Bitcoin, of course, and the principle of elasticity. So we have learned about and I'm a generation that came out of the credit crunch and of the financial crisis in 07 and 08. For me, mercy is relevant, Andreas. The reason is because when we act like bits and zero and ones, then this is logic, yes. But we might enter into times where sometimes logic doesn't really work because human beings make failures, and there are certain constellations where it wouldn't be human to be logical. So to answer your question, I do believe that we have colliding concepts. The one is a very modern blockchain Bitcoin concept, which I really love. The other idea is the traditional legal concept. And I think this is where it merges together. Code is law, we cannot deny this. It regulates human behavior. But on the other hand, I think legal principles needs to have a word into that too.
So it's Dan from Simmons & Simmons. He's a lawyer from Simmons & Simmons. You always have to take care of you. Talk to lawyers. So I think you're simply invited a new song title, like it's Mercy of Algorithm, or I don't know. It sounds really good, so please, your answer.
I like the theory. I think it has to be tested in practice. And in practice, I have a problem with the idea of the financial system is the economy, because that tends to leave out the people, and that is the antithesis of mercy. Now, I am a bit jaded. I am a bit cynical. My name is Andreas Antonopoulos. If you hadn't noticed, that is a Greek name. I'm standing in Frankfurt, and I'm being told about mercy from the financial system. Both of my parents are pensioners in Greece who paid their taxes for 40 years, who contributed to private pension funds, who participated in an open European community and currency through their democratic vote that no longer applies, and have been shown no mercy. Absolutely none at all. In fact, what they have been shown is confiscation of their hard-earned private pensions, confiscation of their state pensions, confiscation of their disability funds, currency controls, ATM restrictions, Pardon me if I don't see the mercy of the current system. Let me tell you something. My mother's pension got saved by Bitcoin. So applied mercy, practical solutions, pragmatic responses, putting the financial system as the core of the economy, the system of regulation and law and the institutions of sovereignty and democracy are failing all around Europe. If you don't believe me, take a look around. Renzi's going out now, right? Third in a row. How many countries in Europe have to turn fascist before we realize that something is very broken with the system of our current democratic institutions? I would say the same applies, and I'm not saying that America is better. Hold on, we just elected what we call Cheeto Hitler, the orange fascist. The problem is that we're seeing at the moment, directly as a result of the financial crisis of 07-08, the erosion of trust in social institutions and the failure of those social institutions to offer answers, which pushes people into populist and reactionary solutions. I hope Bitcoin isn't one of them. I don't think it is. I look at pragmatic solutions. So again, I am very skeptical. I am jaded. I'll accept that. I come from a background where I've seen the results of the current regulatory system. And to me, that looks like failure. So I'm willing to try something else. And we'll see if it works. I don't know how it's going to work out. I am quite idealistic, though.
Very good view. Enrique, so you're kind of differentiate in the way that we work in a way that we don't want anonymous accounts to be worked on the blockchain. So maybe could you say something about the way it differentiates?
At Blockchain Helix, we have been working with blockchain in a way that we could allow some like traditional stuff that's provided from financial services should be optimized and to happen in an easy manner. We don't really believe that we should start everything on blockchain. We don't really believe that as many people say this, like that we could provide some kind of ID stored on the blockchain. Because as Andreas has said before, we need some kind of natural asset on the platform in order to get trust on it. So if you don't have that, if you need to onboard all information again and again and again, you need some kind of trust provider, someone that's gonna put the information on the platform. So we think that for money, it's perfect. Like Bitcoin, it's perfect because you don't need to put more money on the platform. You just get inflation on the supply and on the demand for the currency. But when you have some other kind of stuff, you need some trust providers in order to bring this asset on board. So this is how we think it's kind of different from Bitcoin because we need a third party. It's not the algorithm alone. It cannot do everything. We need someone to put trust inside.
Okay, so maybe your opinion on somebody who gives trust to a platform, maybe.
Well, I don't want to make this like a back and forth between me because I don't disagree with most of the ideas being expressed here. Yeah, there are many examples, like for example, one of the things that we hear a lot with blockchain is this idea of using it to trade extrinsic assets, pork bellies, gold, steel, oil, corn, whatever. Whenever you have an asset that is effectively hypothecated, right, where what you're trading is a certificate of ownership and not the actual ownership, someone has to hold that asset. If it's not a virtual asset, if it's not a financial instrument, if it's not an ethereal asset that can be stored on chain, someone has to hold custody of that. And there is a very big problem at the moment with hypothecated assets. I think the best example is gold, right? So right now, gold is traded in paper at 10 times the rate that it is traded physically. and we're not quite sure the gold is there. Every now and then inspections happen and you get a beautiful gold bar, you drill through it and it's full of tungsten. And the hypothecated warehouse goes, I don't know where the gold went. So trust is essential in those situations. You cannot secure an extrinsic asset without having a trusted third party. And Bitcoin isn't about removing all trusted third parties in all circumstances and centralizing everything on one chain with one model of operation. It's simply saying for some things you can use a system of mathematical proof and voluntarily participate in it. It's not for everything. In fact, I'm very skeptical of the idea that blockchain can be applied everywhere. Right now, everybody's running around with this blockchain hammer and they're looking for blockchain nails to hit. And it's really amazing because we have this saying in California that if you go into a dark room and you say blockchain, blockchain, blockchain 3 times, a venture capitalist jumps out of the closet and throws $100 million at you. And I thought that was wrong until I tried it in my hotel room, and so now I'm starting a blockchain startup. Anyway, yes, third parties are absolutely necessary, especially if you have extrinsic assets. I think one of the interesting things we're seeing with blockchain technologies in general, where immutability would be useful, is this idea of recording provenance and chain of custody, so that one of the problems is you go into one of these warehouses or vaults that are supposed to store the gold and you say, show us your gold, right? There's no way to know if the records they have been fabricated. There's no way to show forensically that they haven't modified them. So if some gold disappears, you can't go back and look at the trail and see where it went. I think the opportunity of having an immutable record where you can do auditable logs that are recorded and cannot be modified can actually strengthen third-party custody of physical goods by providing provenance. Someone suggested using it for fake drugs, for example. But in general, this idea of immutability as a record works very well with third-party custodians. So I think that's a good application.
I think we should do credit for it, maybe. But one thing that it's important, we sometimes talk to some institutions, some consultancies with some banks, and they usually say, like, if you get some kind of trust provided from some institution, in our case, trust providers are going to be some kind of banks or something like that, are they liable for the information? Are they going to get like sued by another company that use that information for business purposes, and then, as Andreas just said about like gold, if the gold wasn't there, if something was wrong, who is liable for that? Who is liable for that information? We actually, like, it's kind of a legal stuff. It's not related to the technology. It's about like protecting thing. Maybe the guys, the lawyers here could say something about it.
Yeah, I would like to probably collaborate with Michael in this instance. Is for me, first I would like to state that it is so important to have inspiring voices in this area, because you need, to a certain extent, you need to ignore the regulation and the legal framework to develop and establish something that is completely new. And it is totally correct that you don't have to ask for permission. However, its regulation would not ignore you. Regulation will come back and will try to get the power back, but for a good sense, because for society. So probably I hope Michael would support me in this, in my opinion, and I believe certain legal principles are already applicable to smart contracts and Bitcoin and alternative coins. But what we need to figure out is that in certain instances, like liability or governance, that is very important for a bilateral view of the law, how we can apply the principles to what I call a distributed trust. And Mike, would you agree to that?
I mean, that's part of what I meant when I said, how do we master the transitions? I mean, the example you gave was assets being put on a blockchain. That's more or less an administrative, making administration a bit more effective. The really challenging thing is with the bitcoins that there's no issue. Who is it?
Everyone.
Yeah. Oh, no single issue.
Oh, no, that's not a challenge. That's a feature.
Yeah, that's a feature. But okay, the legal challenge with it is that there is no single issuer I can turn to in terms of, like with the gold. Go there. I have a record. This is my gold. Give it to me. It's not there with the bitcoins. So that's the real legal challenge. So everything that we are used to in terms of how we live, what do we expect in legal terms, is that there's someone we can turn to. I mean, so often, and I'm trying to get philosophical now, but so often you see situations where something bad happened and people are saying, like, someone needs to be responsible for it. And that's the same thing with the Bitcoin. With the Bitcoin, well, that's what makes us think about Bitcoin. I think so. It is, because the challenging thing is you, at least in my perception, you accept the Bitcoin for payment because you accept someone else to afterwards accept the Bitcoin again. So you trade real assets against Bitcoins because you think someone else is going to accept the Bitcoin again. But there's no legal concept behind it. There's no one who really needs to accept the next Bitcoin transaction.
Right. So I think this fiction is really interesting because to me every currency works this way. And the idea that currency only has value because of the sustainable fiction of forward spending, the idea that the next person will accept it, and that fiction is not concrete. It's not dependent on who the sovereign is who issues. The issuer does not create that fiction. It is the common economic use of the currency. Because we see when the common economic use of the currency fails, but the sovereign issuer is still there, they're still stamping, they still say, absolutely accepted for all debts, public and private, this is real money. But if it says 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars on it, and the next person has failed to buy that fiction, the currency is worth zero. Because in the end, it wasn't the issuer that gave it value. It wasn't the sovereign that gave it value. There is no recourse, there is no gold, there is no reserve. All there is the economic activity of the participants in every currency. So what Bitcoin does is simply recognizes that absolutely. In fact, I would argue that where if I have a note in my hand and it has the stamp of a sovereign, it's very difficult for me to validate that that note is real. In the case of Bitcoin, I can forensically examine independently, without appeal to authority, without asking if the serial number is correct, myself, and trace it all the way back to the Coinbase. And at the moment of creation in the Coinbase, the seigniorage of that currency, I can validate its energy proof of work. So to me, that is a much stronger guarantee than that can be provided by a sovereign, because I don't know if the ECB is running the printers 24 hours a day and printing more and more notes for which the provenance is unknown. Well, actually, I do know. They are, right? And that's the problem, because what, in this case, it's not just that the fiction of economic activity is the powerful one, it's that that fiction is being actively undermined by the very sovereign that is supposed to guarantee it. And what is the recourse? You talked about liability. You talked about having someone to hold responsible. Okay, Deutsche Bank rigged Libor. Who went to jail? Deutsche Bank rigged the gold markets. Proven in court, all of the evidence. Who went to jail? No one. Right? And when this happens again and again, and the recourse, the punishment, is less than the profit margins earned from the crime, that is endorsement to continue the crime. So, in your system where you say, we must be able to point the finger and say, the liability lies here, you're talking as a German lawyer who no longer has the ability to point that finger. Because when you point at Deutsche Bank, they point at the New York headquarters that points at the Singapore holding company, and you are tied up in useless litigation where you have no power. The system of justice has to work for that fiction to be meaningful. If you say, I have to rely on being able to apply liability to someone, but again and again and again, if that someone is a multinational corporation with billions of dollars, even worse if they are a bank, the justice system can't touch them. They are above the law. They own the law. And in that case, your fiction of liability has failed. Your fiction of the sovereign issuer of currency has failed. And we're simply presenting an alternative. And it won't have to apply the regulation. Yes, the regulator will come back and they'll wag their fingers at us. And they'll say, no, you can't do that. And there'll be two options. Yes, we'll do it, or yes, we'll do it outside Germany. Either way, right? Because we now live in a global world. So this is a fundamental change. You have to start understanding that trust in an institution in itself is a model we've tried. You like it. Some people like it. It is not the only model. It is not the only model that can be applied in society. And outside of that model does not lie chaos. Outside of that model simply lie other models that we are willing to explore. And what we're hearing again and again from regulators and from supporters of the current system is, après moi le déluge, right? Beyond me is chaos. We either live under this system with the broken justice and the no liability and the inflated currency, or chaos, anarchy, terrorists, pedophiles will take over the world. That's bullshit. It isn't that way. We have ways of organizing society that are flexible, ways of organizing society that are novel and interesting. And I find it very ironic that what is being presented as the alternative is a system that in the eyes of many has failed. And if you continue to ignore the fact that it has failed, that's why people stop voting. That's why people stop believing in justice, and eventually, that's why people stop believing in your currency, and your currency is worth nothing.
As I already mentioned, it is kind of crisis of culture, so we give Michael the chance to at least answer this.
Just two words. I'm not an advocate of that there needs to be a centralized issue. That's not my point. My point is that currently, as, let's say, powers stand, we have a legal system that only refers to fiat currency.
So, whose failure is that?
Maybe a failure, maybe just a fact. From a legal point of view, you cannot pay your taxes with bitcoins. There needs to be a you need to convert it into fiat currency. Otherwise, it won't be accepted. So you can do part of what you describe as a new system, a new way of living, a new way of maybe society contract. You can do that in part of your life currently, but you cannot do it in all your life currently. So, question is how do we master the transition? But the point was well taken that obviously the current regulatory system is based on just the thinking as it stands today, and regulators try to squeeze in Bitcoin as they perceive it. Some say it's a risk to consumers, some say it's not something that we need to bother about at all, depending on where you come from. Others simply make laws and say Bitcoins is illegal. So that's different approaches, obviously. But the question is, if you want to get in, or if you really want to make a society based on a decentralized system, obviously you need to introduce some new concepts in terms of legal systems. Because I don't think that as being humans, we don't want to totally abandon mercy. I understood, and I'm fully in agreement that can be mercy applied to a blockchain Bitcoin system as well. It's just a question of how you program it and how you execute it. Question I have, and I think it's a long way to go until the legal system, and I mean the civil law system in between individuals for payments, etc., pp., until it recognizes that there may be another way of transferring value that could be executed and could be actually, you could obtain a judgment on in court.
May I just very quickly, because I do agree with you on that a lot. So what I'd like to introduce very briefly is a project that I've been working on for the last year. It's primarily the work of one of my colleagues, Pamela Morgan, who is an attorney. And this project is called the Decentralized Arbitration and Mediation Network. And it is the application of the New York Convention on Arbitration to combine that with smart contract technology so that you can take a smart contract that's been executed on the chain, and if there is a dispute between the participants with an elected counterparty and a legal framework of private contracts that recognizes arbitration as the means of resolving it, to be able to tie traditional law with smart contracts, but not on the basis of please recognize us in one of the following 194 jurisdictions, but on the basis of using an international treaty to provide private, customizable, innovative arbitration, mediation, and dispute resolution services through smart contracts. So I'm not completely ignoring the need for dispute resolution. Justice is simply dispute resolution. And there are more than one ways of doing them. In fact, many of the most effective ways of doing justice are outside of criminal, of course. If you murder someone, you're not going to go mediate with your victim. But in civil issues and disputes for payments, as we're talking here, there are flexible systems of dispute resolution that do not have to be based on a national jurisdiction. And so I would like you to take a look at this, because we are developing some interesting research there. It's called the Decentralized Arbitration and Mediation Network, or DAM. So, enjoy.
Maybe something for Eddie, because you're actually from Russia. Maybe it's something that you could relate to.
Yeah, sure. So I've heard the discussion about the legal side of Bitcoin, from the technology side of it. I have no technology background. I have no legal background, but I've been involved in the Bitcoin industry since 2014. So I've been doing business here. I'm just an ordinary customer. I have never gone deeply into the technology of Bitcoin or blockchain. But what I can say is that I've been paid in Bitcoin and using Bitcoin for 2.5 years already. Since joining Cointelegraph, I have never been paid in any currency except Bitcoin. All of the payments from our clients we get in Bitcoins. All contracts we sign and payments we get all in Bitcoins. Everything is assigned and all of the payments we get in Bitcoin. So everything is connected wholly with cryptocurrency, and we have never ever faced any problems from the legal side with any clients in any part of the world, including China and Russia. So even I used Bitcoins to come here. So for me, that's a sign. I don't understand Bitcoin deeply, and I don't see any necessity to do that, but I use it. And for me, that's the biggest sign that it can be used by any person in this room. It can be used in B2C as well, after we scale it. So, yeah, for me, that's the biggest sign that Bitcoin is really the future. That an ordinary customer like me can use it. So, that's all I can say about Bitcoin, actually.
So I would like to introduce some questions from you, if you have any questions. So maybe on the back, you've been the...
Sorry, yeah, I'm the second startup guy here, and my startup concerns prostitution. So first of all, in Germany, legal prostitution about throwing.
You're welcome in the red light district here.
Yes, I'm right here, so this is my area. So anyway, my question is, I have a suggestion which could be the proof of concept for sort of the legal and the Bitcoin side coming together. And I want to sort of put this up out in the air because somebody mentioned taxation. So I wrote something 2 years ago, and it was about how to tax cash economies without compromising the anonymous, like what Bitcoin, what's our principle behind. So what I suggest is, if the legal team is here, I'd love to talk to you later, but basically my suggestion is that we use Bitcoin or any other form, but Bitcoin of course because it's decentralization, use in the red light district to use this conversion to fiat, so that the women can be taxed properly, or prostitutes themselves. There's also male prostitutes. So I have a male prostitute also, so equal opportunities, okay. So anyway, so could it be used as a sort of exchange for the women, which will also protect them because they have no physical value on them to be stolen and to be, physically assaulted? Can be used to exchange at, for example, Frankfurt Börse, in Frankfurt, the city as an exchange where they can be taxed properly and be treated as normal citizens because it is legal. So could there be a structure? Could that be the little tool that could help? It's a win-win for the state and for the women.
So, first of all, Andreas, and maybe Daniel later.
So this is an interesting subject. In fact, we have seen Bitcoin used, and generally there is a very good use case for Bitcoin in the case of people who do not have power. So disempowered individuals, whether that's women in Afghanistan, whether it's illegal immigrants who are undocumented and are being harassed by racist immigration police or racists in general, whether it's women running away from an abusive husband and needing to take value with them without that being traceable to their husband.
One of the reasons for prostitution also.
Yes, and we see it with young gay kids in the United States who are running away from home. And need to be able to have a way for people to support them when they don't have a permanent address or a bank account, they're not of legal age. So we are seeing, in very narrow cases, the use of Bitcoin in many of these areas. Specifically in the area of prostitution, in the United States, we have had many examples of women organizing small Bitcoin communities. In fact, one of the things they've used is multi-signature technology, where they share the signature power so that none of them can be coerced into, beaten up into giving away their money. And by not carrying cash, they're much safer in an environment where it's not legal, which makes it worse, because in that case they get beaten up and they don't call the police, because they're the ones who get arrested. So we are in fact seeing this. We're seeing it also in other environments. It's beginning to happen. It's a very powerful technology. About 6 months ago, a publication in the US, you may have heard of this, is the Backpage. Backpage is an online forum, classified personal ads publication in the US that was one of the main places where escort services and essentially prostitution services would advertise for clients in the US where it's illegal. Recently, Backpage, even though they can't sue them because they have a free speech right to publish, right? Even though the government cannot sue Backpage directly, what they did was they threatened Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and PayPal and had them cut off access to Backpage so that the escorts and prostitutes could not buy advertising space in Backpage. So they tried to do it extrajudicially, in violation of our common jurisprudence, right? This is thuggery in the form of the government, of course. And what was the result? A massive influx of people into Bitcoin, who Backpage switched to taking Bitcoin for its ads, and several meetups around the United States were having tutorials teaching prostitutes how to use Bitcoin so they could place their Backpage ads and how to use a Bitcoin ATM to convert their money. To many people this probably sounds strange. To me it doesn't at all. This is happening already. It is a very good fit. And one of the main things is that it allows control over money, sovereignty and power to the self for some of the most disadvantaged people in our society, and that's a good thing. Let me see what the lawyers have to say.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for the attempt to bring blockchain and law together. I really encourage, I'm really happy about this. I cannot, when you are a lawyer from a legal perspective, it is not so much what you do dealing with the money, what you're doing with the money. So whether this is for prostitution or for other services or for buying a car, what we want to focus on is the instrument of payments. And the instruments of payments is a historically developed instrument. So I would like to say that or traditionally, Bitcoin would not be seen as money per se, but it is a commodity that various societies give a certain value to this commodity. And if you are in this society that gives value to a commodity, then you would have this transfer that we're looking in as a payment services lawyer into the legal framework. So, and now starts the clash of cultures, because when we had the gold standard, then gold was being deemed to have a certain value by society. And we observe this right now, society gives Bitcoin a certain value, but not all of them.
And the question is quite simple.
Sure.
Could the framework work, this hybrid, that the state will recognize Bitcoin as the exchange into fiat for taxation? Would that work in Germany?
The correct legal answer to this would be it depends. And the short answer is yes, it could work. And unfortunately, I have to say but. Yes, it could work because when you have a legal statement that a conversion is legally binding, that you have settlement finality, that you can convert a Bitcoin or alternative coin for that matter to real money, then it would work. I avoid to say the issue or the problem. The challenge would be that again the financial system and the payment system is something that needs to be preserved. And let me, before I elaborate this, I do believe that history is a recurring sequence of situation, discovering a problem and providing a solution to solve the problem. And this is what we always, it is always recurring. And this is what Andreas was addressing, that we have certain problems that we see in our situations in the payment system. However, the principles that has been transferred up to now has been proven that it can address certain risks and it can solve certain problems. And this is where I would like to thank you again for your approach to combine the one concept of blockchain and Bitcoin, the concept of Bitcoin, I should say, and the traditional concept of law. I believe this is the future where we come from. I believe that the future which the next generation lives in and moves forward in is a conversion of both, of the technology and of the law. But it is not that we have a left-wing speaker who only represents one word and a right-wing speaker who represents the other word. I think the solution would be that we have to converge and emerge together to find new solutions.
Just do it.
You don't need permission for that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty clear in Germany.
I need to pitch this to, I'm actually doing this, I'm going to Frankfurt to pitch this to them because...
Why not?
Start paying taxes, that's a very powerful statement.
Nothing is wrong with it. So, in legal terms also, I mean, if you have a value of a Bitcoin, you can also assess taxes on the basis of that Bitcoin value.
It's still regulated by the state though.
Still regulated by the
Because
state.
it has to spend the cash to spread it out for people to use it. Because the person that's paying, the guy, it has to be simple for him. It has to be non-existent for the conversion, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's software technology, etc.
That's
right?
but it has to be
That's what
taught.
that's working.
Has to be taught.
And because it's working, and that is a statement to be made here. I'm not saying it's bad or not, but the fact is, because it's possible, German regulators started to regulate it as a financial instrument, because the consequence of it is that at least those institutions that regularly trade with bitcoins need to KYC their customers, because otherwise it would be the system you maybe would prefer. It's anonymity or pseudonymity, and that's what current legal system and current lawmakers like. So if you don't rely on that part, if you don't want that anonymity, that's perfect. You can work with it.
So I think it's one more question. I think you had a question.
Yeah, I see a conflict in general. If you have an account, you have certain rules in Germany, like you have a bank account. There is no bank secret anymore. There is a automatic Datenaustausch between countries, between Europe, between the US, and this is not the idea of privacy in dealing with Bitcoin. So in general, this conflict, I think you can't clear it, because if you say, okay, we do some regulation, we try to accept Bitcoin for payment in business, then you have to say, okay, we have an account, and then people start to say, okay, let's look to your account. What's happening there? For some reason, even if you pay your taxes, there are some interests and there are some procedures now which are developed and which are proven and done every day. You can't match this to the idea of privacy dealing with Bitcoin in general. And maybe in the private area, you say, okay, let him do his privacy and his private deals, no problem. But if you start to deal assets and you have Mehrwertsteuer, you have taxes on this, then it's already started. They want to say, yeah, how much is in general there, and we have to prove this. And then we have in Germany Steuerprüfung. There are so certain needs where people say we have to look on your account. Generally, it's about accounts. You have a bank account, you have a Bitcoin account or a Bitcoin bank, but the idea of legal in general bank transactions doesn't fit to the privacy idea of being anonymous in Bitcoin. I think this is very difficult in philosophical.
Okay, I think this is more a statement. Or do any of you want to say something about this?
I think one of the things that is very difficult when presented with disruptive change is the reaction of conserving the status quo, conserving the certain assumptions of the systems that already exist, is that people can't see a way forward. They can't see how does we assume all of these things to be as they are for good reason. This violates all of these assumptions. How do we go forward? What happens next? I mean, this doesn't meet the assumptions. The assumptions, there is someone in control. The assumptions, someone issued this. The assumptions, I can see someone account. There is an account. There is a coin. Well, in Bitcoin, there is no account. There is no coin. There is no issuer. There is no transparency under certain circumstances. You can't see the account. And then we come to the difficult point, which is then the discussion changes into, well, there should be. Or I want there to be. I want Bitcoin to not be private. I want all transactions to be visible. There should be transparency. It should not be possible for X. And I can say, I want Santa Claus to be real. That doesn't change the fact that Santa Claus is not real. One of the really fundamental problems in this discussion is that when people say, it should be X, or I want it to be X, or it shouldn't do Y, the answer today, based on Bitcoin, is, but it does, and it is, and it won't. Now what? So if you take the assumptions and you say, I should be able to see the account, There's no account. You can't see the account. I should be able to inspect everybody's wealth. Well, you can't. This is now a fact. Well, I don't want Bitcoin to exist. Well, you can't stop it. Now what? Now we go forward and we say, this is the world we live in. 3rd of January 2009, the world changed. And now we have to look forward. You know, there was a time before nuclear weapons existed, and now nuclear weapons exist. There was a time before Zika existed, and now Zika exists. There was a time before civil rights existed, and now civil rights exist. And there was a time before Bitcoin existed, and now Bitcoin exists, and you can't stop it, and you can't force people not to use it, and you can't see their accounts, and you can't see their wealth. And we, as a society, have to move forward with these facts and accept reality. It is not useful to discussion, it is not useful to policy, it is not useful to society to say, but it shouldn't be like this, or I don't want it to be like this. That is denial, right? And denial is a natural response in the face of extreme change, but it's not a productive response, it's not a useful response. So I agree with you, we have to look at what happens next. So what happens if it's not just very large corporations that can choose not to pay taxes? What happens if criminals will have privacy? And the question is, will everybody else also have privacy? Or will we only create systems of surveillance that only the innocent have to supply? Because all of the criminals will ignore them. I mean, if you're committing a crime, the least crime you can do is also use a private cryptocurrency. Right? So we have to accept the fact that now this becomes a choice. And if that is the choice, and everybody can have complete privacy, complete anonymity, global transactions to anyone they want, in any amount they want, and no one can stop it, what happens next? And what I'm hearing continuously in this discussion when I go around the world and I discuss this with governments, with lawyers, with regulators, is we wish reality wasn't real. I can't answer that. That is not a basis for productive discussion. We have to start from the facts. And the facts is this now exists. It cannot be made to not exist anymore. Mathematics cannot be uninvented. I can build a Bitcoin-like system in 2 weeks if I'm sitting in my basement by myself with no input. And so can thousands of others. So even if one system shuts down, 10 others will be built to replace it. This now is reality, and now we have to decide what to do next.
So thanks a lot. I think what we learned so far is that we're living in a time of massive change right now. I think that what else we learned is if you want to be thrown by massive amount of money, you should go to a dark room in California. So I think we have a crash of culture in between, but I think the discussion just started, and I think that every player is really keen of starting and following the discussion.